Hey there, this is Natalie, and in this video I'm going to be talking about Naofumi's love life in the Rising of the Shield Hero, particularly when it comes to Raphtalia. This will contain spoilers about things like whether Raphtalia and Naofumi have gotten together yet, and whether Naofumi has gotten together with anybody else. What it won't contain, however, is a definitive answer on how things will be at the end of the story. This is because while the web novel version of The Rising of the Shield Hero is finished and does give definitive answers on who Naofumi ends up with, the author has said that the web novel and light novels are to be considered separate works. They start off the same, but the light novels then diverged so much as to become a new and unique story. So while there may be some similarities, a lot of characters and arcs are completely different, and there is no reason to think that the light novel series will have the same endings for all, or indeed any, of the various plotlines, and that includes the romance plotlines. This makes Shield Hero different from other series that I cover on my channel, like Mushoku Tensei and Re:Zero, which were also originally web novels that then became light novels, with manga and anime adaptations coming later. With those series, and indeed most Japanese series that started life as web novels, the web novel can be considered a first draft of the final story. And while things may be expanded on, tweaked or refined as the author reworks things into the light novel volumes, the important plot points, revelations and endings are the same. With Shield Hero, that's not the way it is. So they're two entirely different canons, and spoilers from the ending of the web novel really only spoil the web novel. They don't tell us how the light novel series is going to end. The anime and manga are both based on the light novels, so the light novel canon is the one most people are interested in, and that's what I'll be talking about in this video. I just wanted to clarify that in case you've seen any endgame spoilers about who Naofumi ends up with, or seen other stuff that contradicts what's in this video. There are two different canons, and the one I'll be talking about doesn't have an ending yet. The light novels are up to volume 22, and the latest volume does have some developments in Naofumi and Raphtalia's relationship, so I'll be spoiling right up to the current volume, but I'll only be spoiling what's necessary to talk about Naofumi's romantic relationships. So if you want to see spoilers about other plotlines and characters, then please consider subscribing and check out some of my other Shield Hero content, as I'm making lots of videos about Shield Hero throughout season 2 of the anime. So, the situation with Raphtalia and Naofumi is really about whether he develops into seeing Raphtalia as a love interest, given we know that she's been in love with him since very early in the story. At first, Naofumi has a distrust and dislike of women in general, after being framed and betrayed by Mine. And I'm going to be calling her Mine here because I don't want to say bitch or whore too many times on YouTube, and because I think Multi is a stupid name. As he gets to know Raphtalia, Melty, and other women who act with integrity, he does start to view people in this new world as individuals, and decide whether a woman is trustworthy based on what she actually says and does, rather than just on sharing a gender with the absolute worst. So he no longer mistrusts women specifically, being happy to welcome plenty of them into his circle of friends and allies. But he still feels disgusted by the idea of sex or romantic relationships with women for quite some time, due to the effect that Mine had on him. He comes to love Raphtalia, Philo, and other members of the cast fairly early in the story, but he can only consider that he loves them in a familial way, as surrogate daughters or sisters, who he loves in the normal way that people love their daughters or sisters, not in the usual anime way. Naofumi being of this mindset leads him to assume that Raphtalia feels the same way. He's not an oblivious harem protagonist in the sense that he never notices that many of the women around him want the D. I mean, there are some characters that are constantly trying to seduce him, and while he finds it annoying, even after he gets over his aversion to sex, he does know that that's what they're doing. But with Raphtalia, he does end up being oblivious to her romantic feelings towards him for a long time. For instance, whenever someone does try to bring up that she's in love with him and Raphtalia gets angry or embarrassed about it, he takes it as meaning that she's just very serious and doesn't like to joke or talk about that sort of thing, rather than that she's embarrassed about being put on the spot because she actually does want a sexual relationship with him. Naofumi viewing Raphtalia as a surrogate daughter for a long time is also naturally in part because he did watch her grow up, and he does justifiably feel like he raised her. It happened very quickly due to the way that demi-humans age as they level up, and I have a whole video about that if you want to know about how demi-human aging works as a mechanic in the setting. But it means Naofumi still has fond memories of Raphtalia as a cute kid. It is outright stated that he's not comfortable with the idea of an actual lolly, and so it does take a lot of time with Raphtalia, both acting as well as looking like an adult, for him to be able to see her the way she sees herself, as a grown woman that he could feasibly see as a romantic partner. This is very frustrating for Raphtalia. In the arc that will be shown soon in the anime, Naofumi and Raphtalia travel to Glass's world, along with some of Naofumi's other allies, and they're separated when they arrive. Because people who travel to a new world for the first time have their levels reset, Raphtalia reverts back to her child form until she gains some levels in Glass's world. But by the time Naofumi finds her, she's already aged back up and looks like her usual adult self. He is extremely disappointed that he never got to see her in her child form again, not because he's into that, but because he feels like a father who's missed out on a chance to see his daughter as a cute little kid again. Raphtalia hates this, almost as much as she hates that Naofumi becomes very attached to a shikigami called Raph-chan, which he generated from a lock of Raphtalia's hair, and which takes the form of a cute, cuddly little raccoon creature. Naofumi thinks Raph-chan is amazing and super adorable, largely because she's connected to Raphtalia. But Raphtalia doesn't want to be seen as something totes adorbs, and decidedly non-sexy like that. At least, not by him. So, what happens to change Naofumi's attitude about sex and romance? Well, for that, I need to spoil a whole new character's storyline. The character in question is a demi-human girl named Atla. She comes into Naofumi's life because he's offered the chance to buy a demi-human of a rare and very strong white tiger-based race, who is being sold as a slave. Naofumi is buying up a lot of people who are being sold as slaves to populate his village and raise his forces, though I went into the whole deal with Naofumi and slave contracts and why it isn't as bad as that sounds in my video about Keel, so I'm not going to discuss all of that again here. I'm just giving an overview of the plotline, and technically, yes, he's buying more slaves. This demi-human is a boy called Foal, but he's inseparable from his sister Atla, who is blind and also seems to be dying of a disease. Naofumi has some very powerful medicine, plus skills related to healing, and he's able to not only save Atla's life, but also return her to a healthy state. She remains blind, but it turns out she's very powerful and can use life force to see in her own way. She actually ends up being a more powerful fighter than Foal, despite the fact Naofumi had really only been expecting anything from Foal, and he'd gotten Atla basically for free when he bought her brother. Atla is very clearly in love with Naofumi, much to her brother's dismay, as he has a major sister complex. And she's always doing things like breaking into Naofumi's house and trying to get into bed with him, so much so that he gets other characters like Philo to guard him at night, because he's having none of it. She also forges a jealous rivalry with Raphtalia, which actually ends up helping both of them get stronger, thanks to their aggressive sparring. Atla often tells Naofumi that if Raphtalia is his sword, she wants to be his shield. And well, that actually ends up being exactly what she becomes. During the fight with the Phoenix, which is another guardian beast that is unsealed after the spirit tortoise, someone interferes with the battle, and Atla ends up being injured so badly that nothing can be done for her. I'm keeping this high level as explaining how it happens would mean explaining the whole arc, and I want to keep to the topic of Naofumi's love life, but it is a very cruel and unexpected thing, and her death is something that hits Naofumi much harder than pretty much anything else that's happened since the events when he first arrived in this world. Before she dies, Atla uses the last of her strength to tell Naofumi about her wishes, and the first is that she doesn't want her body to return to this world, which he understands as meaning that she wants to be absorbed into his shield. When he does this, he unlocks the Shield of Compassion, which is a Bless series shield, a kind of opposite to the Curse series. He's currently the only hero we know of who has a Bless series weapon. It also means that Atla kind of lives on inside his shield, along with Ost Horai, who of course died when the Spirit Tortoise was defeated. There will be an occasion later on when Naofumi will be close to death, and will get to actually talk to the spirit of his shield through Atla and Ost. Plus, he will sometimes sense from the way the gem on his shield glows that Atla is trying to communicate with him. She wanted to be his shield, and after her death, she literally is. But for now, what's more important is Atla's other wish, which is that Naofumi stops rejecting people's love the way he rejected hers. Naofumi, who is not really thinking straight in his grief and with the rage he feels towards the, at the time, unknown person responsible for Atla's death, takes her words to heart a bit too much, and for a short while thinks that what people want, and what Atla wanted, is for him to start being sexually available to anyone who had shown affection towards him. He tries to seduce a few people, including Atla's brother, something he never really gets to live down after he's come back to his senses. It is a character named Sadeena, the killer whale demi-human I talked about in my video about Keel, who is also best girl by the way, and who has been one of the people most forward about wanting a bit of the old shield hero, who actually sets him straight, telling him that while she would certainly be DTF if she believed that was what he really wanted, this isn't the right mindset to be entering into that sort of thing in. Later, when he does encounter Atla's spirit inside of his shield, she also has a word with him about how maybe he took what she said a bit too far, and he generally moves on from the whole thing with nothing more than a bit of embarrassment. But he does retain the change that he's no longer as close to the idea of physical relationships, and he does start to think about what would happen were he to have some fun with any or all of the female characters who have expressed an interest in him. However, he does still think of starting any kind of sexual relationship as something for the future, once the world is at peace. He knows of past heroes who've had their families used against them, and it doesn't seem like there's an obvious solution when it comes to birth control, at least that he's looked for. So he's averse to the idea of getting Raphtalia or somebody else pregnant while the world is still under threat. Naofumi is also still unsure whether he wants to stay in this world once the fighting is done, though he does learn when he talks to Atla and the other spirits inside his shield that he would be able to take Raphtalia and even a resurrected Atla back to his old world with him if he does decide to choose that path. So it seems that a relationship with Raphtalia isn't dependent on him opting not to return home. Raphtalia did express a willingness to go with him back to his world, even in season 1 of the anime. And obviously Atla would have no reason to be against this either, as she's dead in her own world anyway. And so, over time, Naofumi starts to be a little more romantic with Raphtalia, Although physically, the furthest they've gone is them spending some time alone together, doing what he refers to only as tail stuff. However, in the latest volume, he takes Raphtalia aside to give her an exclusive accessory that he's made for her, and the conversation even turns to the possibility of them getting married. Raphtalia is understandably happy that he's started to think about things this way, but unfortunately, they get into a battle right after this romantic moment, and that's really where the light novel series is currently up to. So there is no conclusive decision there that they're now engaged or anything. What it does give us is a clear sign that Naofumi and Raphtalia are probably a ship that will sail eventually. But if Raphtalia as an endgame romantic partner for Naofumi is looking highly likely, what about when it comes to whether or not it looks likely that a harem situation will come about? By which I mean a full polygamy type thing. It can pretty much already be said that Naofumi has a harem of girls who are interested in him, including all kinds of people, from the already mentioned killer whale woman and her similarly killer whale-ish sister, through to an actual demon dragon. Well, there have been attempts to marry Naofumi to Melty, who is now the queen, where the previous queen was killed during events following Atla's death. Naofumi does still see her as too young to be more than a political marriage partner, but of course she won't always be, so that's something the story may be leading towards. Marrying Melty would make Naofumi the king of Melromark, which may not be something he particularly wants for himself, but which would certainly fit the Xianja-style rising that his story follows, which would traditionally see him obtaining increasingly high status before ending up as a literal god. King would often be a status obtained along the way. I have mentioned before that Shield Hero does follow a Xianja-style structure, Xianja being a style of Chinese fantasy fiction, and I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of it. If that's something you'd like more of an explanation about, please let me know in the comments, because I have considered doing a video about it, and it does make a lot of things in Shield Hero, like the power creep, and the way the story develops in general, make a lot of sense. Also explaining why Shield Hero feels different to other popular isekai series with anime adaptations. But in any case, Melty does look like the most likely character after Raphtalia to potentially become Naofumi's wife. There are other characters he has admitted to finding physically attractive throughout the story, and he has also suggested that he might be up for having some more casual fun with the girls around him after the Atla stuff. But really, there's nothing strong enough with any other characters yet to build any theories around him actually ending up in a romantic relationship with them or married to them. Now, a lot of people do think that it's a bit disappointing that Naofumi and at least Raphtalia haven't officially become a couple yet, even though there have been developments in that direction very slowly over the course of the series. I can certainly see how some people might prefer romance to be a higher priority for the series, especially given how many good waifus are in the cast. But personally, I think it actually suits Naofumi's pragmatic character type that he simply thinks there are more important things going on right now. There are some kinds of characters whose romantic interests and relationship dramas are always at the front of their minds, and so who can still be having angst about a love triangle on the eve of a war to decide the fate of the world. But it would be weird for Shieldy Boy to suddenly become that way. We can certainly get a sense of Raphtalia's frustration, but she's a sensible character too, and that's probably why she'll also be willing to wait until the current many and varied crises are over, as long as she gets some assurance that things are going in the right direction, which she is starting to get. But what do you guys think? Is the romance too much of a slow burn? Do you want to see Raphtalia as the only endgame romance for Naofumi, or do you think a harem ending would suit the story better? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you to my supporters on Patreon, and to everyone who helps me out by subscribing to my channel and watching my videos. Thanks for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon.